All right, what's up? We are going to keep reading. So, yeah, but as I was like, there's the whole thing before. I don't know if you've ever done like a YouTube live, but like you have to like put in, the page number and click, 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 get through all the way to doing it. And it's funny because it's like there's like an initial sort of like juice that I have like coming into this, and a lot of times like when I'm putting that, and I'll put the thumbnail in, like I'll do the thumbnail on Canva, like and it's kind of like by the time I get to this, there's like I'm kind of like whew, like I'm on a downbeat. So anyway, here I am. I'm on an upbeat. Now I'm trying to. It's a fake upbeat right now, but maybe we'll get there. Because one of the things I was laughing to myself in the process of putting, like, of prepping for this, or prepping, just, in like the lead up, was that I was thinking, I was like, kind of like, are you ready for this kind of thing? And I was like, who on earth is ready for what we're about to talk about? Certainly not I. Um, I think that it's like I'm repeating this over and over again in this chapter. I think every time I've read from it, I've talked about how hard it was, to write. Um, and even, let's see. Yeah, I mean, I think, like one of the things about this practice is that um, it's a framework that sort of like I kind of like he's like a nautilus shell analogy. So it just kind of it winds up being something that is really usable, like, and so it just keeps it kind of expands and enriches over time. So you like doing this is like pretty like full on. So anyway, I'm gonna read this. I'm a little bit tired-ish right now. I've just done a bunch of stuff this morning, and I have a call today too, and I want to make sure I get a little something to eat beforehand, something nice. So I just want to make sure I get through this, and I'm going to read, just like dip right in here. 2.5 minutes is like breaking a record for getting to reading right off the top. If you've gotten along this far, you're well aware that you're like, wow, yeah, under 3 minutes. Wow. Okay, so initial development. I'm gonna pull this up here, like the visual. I like this visual here. But might block the sound. Okay, anyway, so toilet training is the first significant battleground in the early months and years of third hub development. A child navigates holding and letting go. The timing of a child's readiness for toilet training is individual to the child, who's learning to restrain and release in a rhythm uniquely its own. Freud famously called this the anal stage. Personal power has a dynamic that exists between what we express and what we contain. Yeah, it's kind of interesting, even just coming off the second hub, how, like when you're in a diaper, it's very second hub. It's just that it's like there's no schedule. It's the inconvenience of things that are naturally arising, like emotions and feelings and stuff. And then you just like poop and pee whenever. There's no like kind of whatever. So it's kind of like in thinking like that, like considering the fact that part of restraint and release is really related to beginning to connect with the world, and like the people, mostly the people and the environment that surrounds us. So the expression of ourself is how related that is to others. So as much as we, the point is that we stand on our own. The part, like, as we get into the more hubs, I'm not going to deep into this. That'll be addressed later. All right. So caring for a toddler is a maddening balance between allowing freedom and avoiding a trip to the emergency room. There's a short period of life when the child is mobile but has limited cognitive capacity for language and reasoning. This emerging will and curiosity can be dangerous, and for some exhausted, overwhelmed parents, preemptive discipline to keep a child safe can be an outlet for their own arising frustrations. The first and second hub development days, while a child is physically and emotionally merged with caregivers, are for unconditional love and connection. And any discipline or punishment only causes distress and confusion for a baby who cannot intellectually reason. They can only develop reflexes. In third hub development, a toddler has awakened to the awareness that it's an individual, and the shift can be jarring for everyone involved. Yeah, like, that's actually like, it's like some of the stuff in here, it's like dropping these like kind of really important things that are just like in a couple of sentences. We just kind of like like sort of bounce along here. But this first sentence in this paragraph is really important. And I'm going to reread it instead of just continuing on. It is funny because it's like people who've read the book will ask me questions, and now having reading it right now, I understand, because I'll think like, yeah, that's in the book. I don't, like, isn't that in the book? And then I read this and I'm like, oh yeah, that could easily be missed. That the first and second hub development days, while a child is physically and emotionally merged with caregivers, are for unconditional love and connection. And any discipline or punishment cause distress and confusion for a baby who cannot intellectually reason. They can only develop reflexes. Now, this is so worth mentioning here and spending a little more time on, because a lot of what is mistaken for cognitive processing and understanding things is actually adapting in a way that makes the baby safe in its environment. So pleasing its caregivers is very, and that could be something, somebody could say, oh well, what's the difference? It's like, well, I ask you, what is the difference between having a survival reflex programmed into you versus having something, like having, a belief system about like behavior, like programmed in a way that you can't actively cognitively reconcile it or even be involved in deciding whether it's something that you want to have as part of yourself. So there's that. Okay, so in third of this, that's why I'm talking to nobody right now. But I will say that in the days that come when people talk to me about this, I think that will be a hot one for obvious reasons, very difficult to consider, especially for people who have parented, or yeah, it's kind of hard for everybody. That one's a hard one. But it's just like nobody knew. Nobody knew. Nobody knew. Okay, like some people do, but whatever. Okay, here we go. In third hub development, a toddler is awakened to the awareness that it's an individual, and the shift can be jarring for everyone involved. During the terrible twos, the autonomy shifting into high gear, a toddler learns the word mine and no as it becomes increasingly mobile. When anchored by caregivers' safe, familiar comfort, a toddler grows the confidence to explore, while its parents help it navigate its abilities and limitations. It's a challenging line for parents to walk, and perfection is impossible. Erik Erikson from chapter 4, called this stage of balancing self-control and self-esteem autonomy versus shame and doubt. If children are encouraged and supported in their increased independence, they become confident in their ability to thrive in the larger world. But when they're criticized, overly controlled, punished, and or not allowed to assert themselves, children feel inadequate in their capabilities. If they don't learn to inhabit their own sense of self, they may become overly independent. They may lack self esteem and feel a sense of shame or doubt about their abilities. Some parents insist on preparing their children for a harsh world by creating one in the home. But research repeatedly shows that trust and security, see chapter 4, in the home are foundations for resilience and confidence in the larger and at times harsh world. Yeah, who's ready for this one, right? There's so much in this. Woo! Okay. Oh my God. Having a safe place to return to after venturing courageously into the world is essential for development of bravery, confidence, and independence. This hub benefits from encouragement, containment, and focus. This is the hub which the sense of urgency that compels us forward emerges, where the time is always now. Okay, this is really key. So one of the things that, even like, if like in following, we're in the first kind of crest, or sort of wave form of with the hubs, like we're coming back in, which is there's a push and pull that is just part of establishing a really, well, I'll use the word healthy psyche, which is feeling safe and establishing independence. And you see this come in and out, because this establishment of independence is going to come back in for that kind of sweetie pie, like kindergarten, first grade kid who's really, like, in general, pretty like huggy and socializing and connecting. And then it's going to kind of swerve back out when it begins to get back into self expression and like the autonomy of adolescence. And then it kind of comes back in when you're dealing with, like, earlier adulthood, late adolescence is like, so we're kind of like, there's this natural thing. And for a kid who does push away, this is one of the things where it's like, that is so healthy. It's so hard for parents who love their kids to see their kids reject and rebel against them. But I was talking with someone this weekend about this, where I was saying, listen, if a kid feels that they're safe enough to push away, and they know that you're going to stay there, that you're not going away, that they're actually, for me personally, I never pushed, like I did, but I did it covertly. And I think one of the things is that it was because my fear of, if I did anything wrong that was going to exile me, really created this kind of internalized tension. And even though I like rebelled on the outside to a certain extent, I never went against my mother intellectually. I dressed in a way that she didn't like totally love, and pierced my nose or did whatever, but I was always showing myself to be like behavioral and obedient and in agreement. I was never disagreeing. And that is part of the thing where this is incredibly healthy, this point of differentiation, which is asserting independence. And there's also socialization that has to do with gendering, which is like, like showing assertion can be like, oh my gosh, like it, without knowing, parents will be like, oh my gosh, being more kind of sweet and ladylike, and being encouraged to behave in ways that are kind of like try back to this thing about trying to prepare a child for the world that's harsh, by being harsh to them, versus like really like, versus creating the home as a incredibly safe haven, so that venturing into the world and the hurts of the world, because the world is at times incredibly harsh, having a place that that you can be safe. So the thing is, it's like when it's like the home has been like this, like, boot camp, and then you're going out into battle, and then it's like, I'm supposed to go back to boot camp versus like going back to sanctuary, and like where going to a place where, yeah, like positive intent is going to be assumed on with us, and that, that like the back to the, five kind of primary like needs, that we're going to be seen, we're going to be like attended to, that we're going to be nurtured and cherished and all this kind of stuff. So anyway, that might have been a little too much of a digression, and it's probably not super structured. But anyway, I'm going to jump back in. So, children need to be able to practice their personal power while paradoxically living within limits and control. Age and developmentally appropriate self control are essential for functioning in the world. And the ability to delay gratification magnifies confidence in personal power. although self-control comes more easily for some children than others. In the early 1970s, Stanford University researchers studied self-control in children between the ages of 3.5 and 5.5 years old in what has come to be known as the Stanford Marshmallow Experiment. In the study, each child was offered a choice between one immediate reward or, if they were able to wait, hence delaying gratification, they would receive two rewards. As the participants aged over the following decades, they were tracked and studied. The children who delayed gratification had better SAT scores and were assessed to be more socially competent than the children who took the singular immediate reward. There was conjecture and moralizing that this so-called ability to delay gratification was evidence of superiority and strength of character. But in 2011, the participants from the original experiment, now middle-aged, took part in a brain imaging study, and the images showed more activity in the prefrontal cortex of the study participants who had delayed gratification. The non-delayers had more substantial activity in the ventral striatum of their emotional limbic brain system. Put simply, the adults who had been children unable to delay gratification had more activity in the areas of their brain that heighten feelings. This begs two questions. Are self-control and emotional regulation naturally easy for some people than others? And should we replace the moralizing about impulse control with support and appreciation for folks who feel more deeply? Those who must work harder than others to achieve focus and self-control. So, two things. One is, I don't know how anybody can read this quickly. I mean, this section alone is like I like wrote it. I could read this over and over again. There's so much in here. Oh my God. And so the Stanford Marshmallow Experiment. Now, you could arguably say, so, and this is, you could say, well, listen, they did the brain scans on the original cohort, and maybe, it's kind of like, and it was like, what is it, 35 years later or whatever. And you could say, well, whatever, what does that mean? But if you read the original study, and this was really an important thing. I read a lot of the sort of this actual studies that were associated with kind of conclusions that we have in the cultural zeitgeist about, these conclusive things like delayed gratification is like kind of this superior quality, and with this sort of, kind of implication that that's something that we choose, the, like that, it's like the, like, show it's character, and by character it's something that's built. But it's like a 3.5 and a 5 to 5.5 years old. It's like, I mean, give me a break. But one of the things in the study that they showed was that there's this really cute part, which is like the original like sample size. The ones that were disqualified, because they'd be like, the researcher would say, okay, here's the study. You get one marshmallow now, but if you can wait, you get two. And that some of the kids, while the researcher was telling them how the experiment worked, would eat it's like a pretzel in the experiment, but like that they'd just be like, okay, eating, and they'd be out. Which is, I don't know, I just found that incredibly adorable that they could, like, they're like, so this pretzel, and they'd be like, yeah, okay, how's this work? But anyway, one of the things that they noticed, and it's in the notes in the study, and I consider it to be absolutely of consequence, is, and it really supports this prefrontal versus PFC versus limbic system notion. This is like the logical reasoning brain versus like a stronger, like more activity in the rational brain than the, the logic brain than the emotional, is that the kids who were delaying gratification were actually doing, like, they were distracting themselves. So they'd be like, "Oh, da, 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 da," and they'd look at other things and they'd like hum, and they'd be doing like pretty like early versions of like dissociative behavior. Like they're taking themselves out of the feeling of emotion of the moment. And that like at that age they're already able to be like, okay, do, and like, tappity tap, singy sing, like look away, look away. It wasn't that they stayed with the marshmallow and were like, I get it, I totally get it, I can just wait and I'll get two. It's like and so if, and this might not be connecting immediately, but it's like for the kids who the kids, the kids who couldn't delay gratification, it's like getting out of the feeling was not something that was like a natural impulse or inclination that was arising from them. And furthermore is the brain studies that show that for children that grew up in trauma, in poverty, in war, and with incredibly, and with parents that were like extraordinarily abusive or neglectful, that their brain development is so impacted by heavily focusing on the build out of the reflexes related to security, that the developmental roadmap, like that, it's like it's not like you have, like, let's say like the brainstem limbic system. It's like you have a finite amount of resources that that go towards the development in any given stage, and that if you're still not grounded, if you still do not feel secure, stabilized, with it contained, and believe in a consistent, responsive environment, that there's a lot of reconciling in terms of figuring out how to adjust to that and survive in it. So the development of the nervous system, that actually like the physical development is impacted by this, and this is validated repeatedly. And these are the studies that are, that go towards the funding of programs that support children in poverty, because of it's actually not just like a kind of throwaway notion. It's actually a scientifically validated notion that if we do not feel secure, that we're going to, like, our brain development is going to be impacted by that. So what this means, and I'm going full circle back into this, is that the idea of it being character based, and the idea that the ability to delay gratification is anything that we really get to choose, because everything that in these early years is really arising out of this kind of responsiveness as it relates to our environment and caregivers. There's no cognitive shaping, there's no rationalization, there's no making decisions to override things with longer term objectives. Everything is about being in the moment and making the moment work. And so, with that being said, the whole issue of moralizing people that are great at focusing, great at working, great at delaying gratification, and I'm one of them. I'm one of the, like, delayers. I'm great at it. It's like the reason if anything, it's one of the more singular, aside from like being intelligent, which I don't really think is like everything here. I think my ability to delay gratification was a huge differentiator from other folks who were coming up in the same circumstances as me. And now, in retrospect, I'm in a very different socioeconomic class. Like, I have a very different life situation than a lot of the people that are like folks that I grew up around, seeing that they struggled with, or they just weren't good at it. They were like doing a lot of partying, they were doing a lot of spending money, they were doing a lot of like being like pleasure in the now. And so that in like kind of an old model for me would have been a point of judgment of like, it's your fault. It's your fault that it's like you could have, if you'd just been able to like save, or if you've been able to focus when, like maybe you're suffering, and maybe if you could have just, not partied and saved that money and stayed focused and worked hard towards something. Um, and I, based off the research and the work that I did in this book, this really changed my like core understanding around this, because I have people in my life that I'm very close with that like whose life outcome is so dramatically impacted by by not being able to delay gratification. Now, I'm not saying people don't need to be like held responsible or whatever. This is more honestly like from living from the inside out. For me, I'm not like going to say I have the final word on this, but is to stop moralizing things that are be out of people's control. And the thing about like even shaming that, because I think the shame drives more of the emotional dysregulation, and feeling bad about not being able to do it drives more dysregulation, which drives more of the behaviors. Um, drives more of the, like, honestly, the shame. It drives the lying that we'll get into later, which is, yeah. I don't know if I think that's kind of a lot. It's really high. So when I was writing the book, there are a couple of moments in the process, I was just that just like knocked the wind out of me, and this was one of them. This one was extraordinarily shook me, and like I remember I had to like walk outside and kind of be like, oh my God, when it kind of really hit, because it actually was impacting a core belief that I held, that a core belief I held, and it instantaneously expanded compassion for certain people. And I'm not going to like do a Pollyanna on this. It didn't make them not accountable for their actions, but it changed a very like deep core disdain I had for folks that were, yeah, actually, yeah. I normally like to share stuff, but stuff that's going to kind of like possibly hurt people, I will not. So anyhow, you probably get what I mean anyway, I think. If not, let me know. So anyhow, wrapping it up. So for all children, learning to control their emotional reflexes, taking responsibility for causing harm, managing disappointment and failure, and learning to understand strengths and weaknesses should be cultivated during the initial development of the third hub. The delicate balance between too much and too little power can be compared to a single match that can either burn something down or be extinguished with a puff of air. Yeah, I mean, the thing is like I think this is a really challenging time for parents, because it's children are exhausting, and I think that the enforcement of obedience and shaming, discipline, it arises from emotional capacity limits being kind of like outstepped. Like, so yeah, it's really relatable. I mean, it's really relatable. I mean, I'm just thinking here. And I think one of the things with this book and folks that are reading it and talking about it is that there's, especially in here, like with parents, um, is really acknowledging that these are really nuanced. These are incredibly nuanced like areas to navigate, and that they have there's absolutely no there's just absolutely no absolutely correct. It's just it's always gonna, I mean, this is the thing, it's natural, so it's gonna have a lot of kind of, I don't know, I'd call it like messiness or whatever. Um, and and with that said, another point I want to make kind of in closing here rather, is that, there's there can't be or the expectation rather, that a child is going to be born to parents who can perfectly understand them, who can perfectly understand like what they're going to need in terms of the development of them expressing themselves truly and purely as as like their like full integrity self. This, it's not happening in a vacuum, parenting. So there's all sorts of other factors that are happening. It's exhausting. Life is challenging. And I think even with the best of intentions, there's very little we can do to control the vicissitudes of life. And all of us are born really as like with this kind of like individualistic, like individual sort of composition of our likes, dislikes, talents, the like destiny, purpose, integrity, whatever. um and for a parent to just think about it, who on earth would ever be qualified to be able to be like the perfect steward to any human being? It's literally like ludicrous, the notion. And so, part of assuming positive intent and giving yourself a break is is like about parenting and realizing that part of what builds us is these adaptations. Like, I mean, they're not, this is also nuanced. It's like by overcoming things. I mean, this is, I'll say that for me personally, um, my my life, like the work and the things that I do that are the most deeply purposeful, have to do with the deepest realizations that have come that have been the result of a forcing function of having to evaluate something that wouldn't go quietly, something that was an obstacle or something that was painful or something that just, yeah, I think obstacle is good, just really challenging. So, yeah, so it's a little bit of a ramble, but I think that for this chapter, I think one of the things I want to be particularly mindful of is like taking a little extra time with it. Yeah, talking through it a little bit more. It's really, really key to everything that has to do with parinama and practicing it, is to really get on our own side and assume positive intent and really see what shaped us. Yeah. Yeah, so it creates a level of freedom that is absolutely extraordinary. And through that level of freedom, that's when we can actually make an earnest impact with others. Because until we have this lockdown, just, even just a little bit, everything is just working on projections of other people and our frustrations and everything. But we clear this out a little bit, there's a lot more room for kind of things like what I'm doing right now. actually. So there's that. There's this. You're doing this. Okay. Anyway, I love you lots. All comments will get an answer from me. Mira, of course, I have to give you a shout out. It means the world to me. To have you watching these and interacting. And yeah, until next time, I'll see you then. Bye for now.